Hey everyone, CW Music Reviews here. I'm CWD, and this is going to be a music review of the new Bat for Lashes album, The Bride. This is the latest full-length album of singer-songwriter, producer, vocalist extraordinaire Bat for Lashes, aka Natasha Khan. Can't say I've been that familiar with her work, although I did get interested in this particular artist when I heard that, well, number one, she had a new album coming out in July. July looked like it was going to be particularly dry for music, so I thought, yeah, I'll see what it's got going for me. Add to that, there was a NPR first listen, and the concept pretty much intrigued me. Pretty much being an album about a woman who loses her fiancé in a car accident. Not exactly something new for like art in general. There's plenty of literature and maybe some movies that have touched on something similar to this, but not very often is it familiar to music, so I thought, this could be okay. And it turns out it's much more than okay. It's actually really good. The album's about 12 tracks in length, about 53 or so minutes in long. There's a bonus track that adds like 13 to it called Clouds, but it doesn't really add a whole lot to the album per se. It's pretty much like it mentions a digital only bonus track. But pretty much the core of the album, it really doesn't feel like it's as long as it says. It just flows like it's a 38-minute or maybe just a regular 40-minute album, which is pretty much a positive sign, and it tells me that she can definitely make a concept that's this engaging from beginning to end, and I like that. So what about this concept I mentioned? It is an album relating to, from what I understand, a short film she did about a woman who loses her fiancé in a car accident and slowly but surely goes through the grieving process and eventually learns acceptance in a way and eventually just learns to find love again. A bit corny in a way, but regardless, there's definitely quite a bit of emotion that goes into the album here, as well as a good chunk of conceptual nuance. Take the opening track, I Do. The album pretty much starts off on a really beautiful and just really fluttering note. She's about to get married. She's about to have the greatest moment in her life happen to her. All the gray skies will go away, and there's gonna be blooms from flowers everywhere. And it's all gonna be because she and him said I do. Oh, it's so precious. But then the album just gets dark. The track Joe's Dream, for example, it pretty much highlights the foreboding foreshadowing of the dark instance that's going to occur just a little down the road. Pretty much the lover Natasha is mentioning, whose name is Joe in this case, he's having dreams about his own death. He's dreaming about angels visiting his room, lightning striking in his black leather, outright ending his life. Pretty much just all this ambiguous imagery. And there's something about the language on this hook here, it's something about the chorus that is particularly interesting. She's incredibly worried about losing her love, to the point where it almost sounds like she's getting a bit selfish. But yeah, it's fine in a way. You're worried about someone you love dying and you don't want that to happen. But unfortunately, it does happen with the track In God's House. This is a clever track when you pause for a minute and think about the role that religious buildings play, particularly churches, as well as the parallels between weddings and funerals. She's all dolled up, ready to meet her love in this house of God, and he's a little late, and she's wondering, wait, what is he doing just leaving me to cry like this? And eventually she comes to the realization that he is dead. These parallels between weddings and funerals I mentioned, the implications there, I don't know if she's like going for this angle, but still, it's fascinating. See, funerals and weddings, they bring families together. It involves one, maybe two people, and it's a time of some kind of strong emotion being felt about this ceremony going on within a religious building, and I think that's pretty intriguing. There's a track, Honeymooning Alone, where she is in a state of denial. She's going around, going on her honeymoon all by herself, and she sees all the pretty girls with tears in their eyes. She feels like she will always be the love that was denied because of death, and she's driving around seeing if she can find her love there, thinking, well, he's not really dead. Which in a way I think kind of like strikes up the metaphor she does mention with love, how Joe is being used as more of a metaphor of love than like a literal person. But the thing about this album is the literal narrative and the metaphor here are both so strong in their own right that the allegory is just like particularly good. You do have the track Never Forgive the Angels, where she's talking about how it's pretty much self-explanatory. Another example of like conceptual nuance here would be the track Widow's Peak, which actually has like a spoken word bit. She's standing on like the precipice of suicide or something of that nature. The echoes and winds going on of like just all these dark thoughts about how she lost her fiance. It's a really peculiar track. It's definitely one of my favorites. The thing about this track is Widow's Peak. The grief in this album peaks right here, and it slowly just comes down eventually. Namely with the track If I Knew, where she slowly comes to this acceptance that he's dead and there's nothing that she can do about it. How she essentially says that if I knew then what I knew now, I still probably wouldn't change it. And with the track I Will Love Again, she is obviously coming to the realization that this is a really tragic thing that happened to me, but I've learned to eventually overcome and move on from it. Then the closing track, In Your Bed, in a lyrical sense I'm kind of conflicted by it. I like how we finally come full circle with her grief, and she's pretty much overcoming it all, and she finally has found another person, but at the same time it just seems so abrupt a change. If I had one complaint about this album, the concept seems kind of condensed in a way, kind of compressed about the story that she's trying to convey with this album, which is weird because there's a couple tracks here like Close Encounters and Land's End that seem maybe redundant, or they don't have like that much direction to them. And the track Sunday Love I don't really have 100% figured out. This is probably during the honeymoon that she goes on by herself with. She seems to see this woman that is feeling this love, whatever Sunday love is. I don't have it completely zeroed down. She seems to be particularly envious of this, even though she is falling apart and pretty much coming apart at the seams because of what happened to her. Regardless, the concept here is particularly well executed, even if the lyricism isn't like super deep. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Only Cura. Not basic, but simple lyricism that goes on, but there's definitely a sense of like intricacy and profoundness to what it is both artists are saying about this particular instance of loss. So that's a cool concept there. What about the music itself? Well, it's actually pretty good and pretty varied. Take the track I Do, for example. It's pretty much a solo vocal and harp piece with like some strings hanging in the background, and she's singing fantastically over this song, as well as a good chunk of the songs here, if not all of them. The music actually adds to the concept particularly well, as it goes from this instance of bliss to just darker and darker and darker over time. Joe's Dream having this really ominous type of bass part going on. It's a really skeletal and kind of a torch song ballad that's going on here. Then extra instrumentation is added to In God's House, which has some light drumming going on and like a really throbbing bass. The chorus actually has these like flourishes of synth going on that really add to the dramatic atmosphere that the track as a whole goes for, as well as the album in a way. I like the hook on this track as well. What's this I see? I think one of my favorite tracks instrumentally would be Sunday Love, which has kind of a Depeche Mode vibe to it with this kind of clippish percussion synth thing that goes on. The drums are particularly driving, adds to like a really dance-ish atmosphere, as well as the throbbing bass that's on this track as well. Honeymooning alone has like a noirish guitar vibe going on that once again adds to the darkness. The only thing that doesn't really vibe with me about this track is like how it opens with like a car crash. I get that it adds to the concept, it like keeps the narrative going, but it just seems kind of cheesy to me. The track Never Forgive the Angels pretty much being like this really just spacey and borderline mountainous type string, slowly strum acoustic bass type atmosphere that really is pretty fantastic. Widow's Peak adding to the haunting atmosphere that the spoken word in particular goes for. All the while there's like all this rumbling and strummed acoustic guitar just hanging in the background as like there's all this windy and just mountainous type instrumentation going on. Adds to kind of a dark ambient-ish thing. It's not so dark ambient that it's like really creepy, but it's definitely a haunting track. The track If I Knew is pretty much the closest the album gets to a piano ballad, and there's like string that adds to like the extravagance and like the brightness that eventually just flows into the album as it comes to its conceptual end in a way. The track I Will Love Again is pretty much the only track here that feels like it goes a little long for its own good. It's like a 5-minute cut. And it's pretty much a straightforward, spacey, baroque pop-ish type atmosphere. Stripped back, ballad-ish bass. It's not a bad track, it's just not really one of my favorites here in terms of instrumentation. I will say the track In Your Bed helps close the album particularly well. I'm guessing Mellotron here, along with some more string to add to the brightness and the outright beauty of the track as a whole. And yeah, it closes out particularly well. So overall, I'm definitely into this album quite a bit. I think Bat for Lashes, like, as I always say, had a chance to win me over as a fan of her music, and I think she particularly does. She pretty much comes through with a concept that is pretty standalone and pretty allegorical, and wins over the listener with her compelling language that isn't so deep and so poetic that it's just outright, you know, Shakespeare-ish, but still poetic enough and pretty direct to pretty much keep the listener engaged and win the listener over. But the most important thing about this album is that the instrumentals here and the production here is particularly good. I'm definitely into the baroque pop and synth pop that goes on for a good chunk of this album, especially if it's as well executed as this. Maybe it's more so contributing to an atmosphere and pretty much sets itself as a platform, but if the platform is this good and the concept is this good, then consider me married to the idea. This album is a plus 2.3 out of plus 3. I will say that there's a few tracks that don't add up to the concept to the album here, as well as maybe a few tracks that feel redundant instrumentally and lyrically, but that's really it. I'm still particularly into the good chunk of the tracks here. There's not really a bad track here, and a good chunk of them are pretty much solid, so that gives me an enjoyable record. But if you give this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was your reasoning for that, and what should I consider listening to and reviewing next? This is CW Music Reviews here, signing off.